Hello there, everyone. Hello, and going, I am live again after ages. How long has it been? It's been like few days, a long time, like a week or something. Anyways, here we are again to get back to Pompey the Great, and we were last at what page were we last at? I need to go check. Sorry, I didn't check before starting. I should have done that. Anyways. I see one person's watching, whoever you are. If you would like to, leave a message in the chat. Um, so yeah. Let me check. Where was I last? Where did I finish last? Sorry, I'll be just. Yes, I remember. We just start in the next chapter. Okay. We start in the next chapter, so I will open that. It is chapter 2. There we go. Chapter 2. Okay, so shall we begin? Hello, Yiski. How are you? Good? Welcome back after a while, right? Um, Back again for Pompey the Great. I think I'm getting better at reading this because the names are pretty hard. Good, thanks. Great. Good to hear that. Um, I'm ready if you are. I have my chocolate milk and a banana. So get your stuff if you are staying to listen. Indeed, been traveling. Oh, traveling at this time? I'm traveling in a month, but yeah, so going for holiday. Anyways, hope you enjoyed your traveling. Let's start. Chapter 2. Adolescentulus Carnifex. Pompey's career might have been stopped in its tracks, or at least stunned, if Sulla had not actively prompted him. Sulla could perhaps achieve all that he desired without Pompey's military contribution, and the young general had no political weight on his own account. He could have been quietly dropped at this point, with the repeated vague promise, never quite honored, of further commands. Of further commands. But instead Sulla chose to bind Pompey to himself even more firmly by marriage ties, offering him his stepdaughter, Aemilia, as his wife. Her mother was Metella, whose previous husband before she married Sulla was Marcus Aemilius Scaurus. Thus, Aemilia was the daughter of a consul and the stepdaughter of the most important and influential man in Rome, and through her mother she was connected to the powerful family of Metelli. It was a good match for Pompey. The fact that Aemilia was already married to Marcius Acilius Glabrio and was several months pregnant was brushed aside. A divorce was speedily arranged, facilitated by the fact that it was Sulla who authorized it, and simplified because there would be no problems over the true fatherhood of the child that Amelia was carrying. Octavian married Livia in the same circumstances several years later, when she was already pregnant with Tiberius. Pompey has been criticized for divorcing his first wife, Antistia. The contrast in the young Caesar, who steadfastly refused to divorce his wife and to comply with Sulla's wishes, will not have been especially marked at the time, but it was no doubt elaborated upon by the later historians who wished to tarnish Pompey's reputation and enhance Caesar's. Antistia's case is a peculiar, poignant, is peculiar, is what? Where was I? Is peculiarly poignant, since as far as is known, she had hardly given Pompey cause for complaint, and orphaned her fa- she had recently had been orphaned. Her father had been killed in a riot for his suspected sullen sympathies. and her mother had committed suicide when she saw her husband's body floating down the Tiber River. Perhaps the marriage and to Antistia had never been anything more than a political convenience, which was now outmoded and overshadowed by more tempting alliances. There had been no children born of the marriage, and when Pompey was not fighting battles, his his numerous attentions were lavished on courtesan Flora, and there is no reason to suppose that his association with this lazy lady ceased as soon as he married Amelia. It was a firm proclamation of his alliance to the house of Sulla and to the Metelli, not a love match. He probably did not feel overwhelmed with emotion when the marriage ended. Only a few months later, Amelia miscarried and died. Sorry. He probably did not feel overwhelmed with emotions when the marriage ended only a few months later and Amelia miscarried and died. Pompey probably hardly noticed her absence. The political developments in Rome were intense, unprecedented, 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 and unprecedented. After the civil wars in Italy and the turmoil in the city, there was such damage to be repaired, starting with the establishment of a firm and a longer lasting government. This was Sulla's main aim. He knew how to provide the stability that Rome needed, but his problem was how to gain the required power and hold on to it. With some semblance of legality, though he had the influence, backed by the armed force, to secure the repeated election to consulship, and perhaps to secure also the election of compatible colleagues. He decided against this method. That was now that was what Cinna had done, so the tactic was to be avoided. Besides, Sulla had no intention of seeking an office that expired after 1 year. If he failed to be elected again, his opponents could seize the opportunity to eradicate all that he had achieved so far. Sulla needed supreme power for an indefinite period, and in this he found himself in diametric opposition to the unwritten Roman constitution. Since the time of the kings, the Roman government had actively shunned the awful concept of supreme power in the hands of one man. Since the two legally appointed councils were both dead, the normal procedure in such circumstance was to appoint the interrex, who would then in turn appoint two suffect councils to take the place of the deceased for the remaining term of their office. The Senate chose its leading member, Lucius Valerius Flaccus, to fill the post of the interrex, but he was not afforded the chance of selecting suffect councils. Instead, Sulla proposed a dictatorship, but one that departed on several counts from the normal variety, which strictly speaking had gone out of use after 202 BC. The original dictatorship was intended to be an office with supreme power, but a short-term tenure, reserved for great emergencies or specific tasks, usually embraced under a generic heading heading Re Gendea Causa, meaning in loose translation, to direct affairs. Once the danger of emergency was resolved, the office was then formally laid down so that the normal government could be restored. Sulla needed more than the consulship, more even than the strictly conventional dictatorship offered. So the people of Rome were brought into play, ironically, for the first time as far as Sulla was concerned, because he intended to abolish such procedures in the future. Valerius Flaccus presented a bill to the popular assembly to make Sulla dictator re publicae constituendae, or dictator to the reconstitute the republic. It was a turn of phrase that Antony Octavian and Lepidus reused several years later in their titulature as tri, triumviri rei plu- publicae constituendae, when they too were empowered to repair the government that had been torn apart by the civil war. Sulla set to president, to president, but his power was potentially greater than the so-called triumvirs, which is a modern term, not an ancient one, whose power was supposedly limited to 5 years. Sulla had no temporal or political limits, whilst the Lex Valeria did not specifically engender the, pro, the prescriptions which were authorized by Sulla's own legislation on the Lex Cornelia. It was the start of a legalized tyranny. Thank you for doing a live. Blizzy Glizzy. Yeah, you're welcome, I guess. Well, you're welcome if you're watching right now. One second, I'm just gonna. Excuse me. Okay, let's get back to it, shall we? Where was I? Okay. One of the new dictator's first concerns was to rid himself of past, present, and potential enemies. Though he originally described only 80 men, the total of those killed in the prescriptions continued to rise to many times that number as men added uh, many times that number as men added names to the list of for various reasons, including pure and simple greed for control of the estates of the prescribed men. It was a free for all and a time to settle old scores. Sulla looked on with indifference, doing nothing to prevent anyone from adding new names to the prescription lists, and notoriously selling the property of the victims at ludicrously cheap prices to his friends. Whoa, thunder over here. It's raining crazy. It's raining like crazy. So I'm going to read what is this. It says, coin of Sulla dating to 81 BC. The head of Rome is shown on the obverse, and equestrian statue of Sulla appears of the reverse. The legend reads El Sulla Feli Dis, referring to the dictatorship of Sulla with the name Felix, which he adopted after his triumph, drawn by Jackie Taylor. Here it is, if you want to see. That is the coins when in Sulla's reign. That's how it looked like for around, what was it, like a year or something like that. And then after he was overthrown, well, we'll see. Well, I can't, I don't want to spoil anything. I mean, not overthrown, he died, but yeah, anyways. Let's not, sorry, I'm spoiling, sorry. Okay. The political program that Sulla set in motion was probably already worked out in broad general detail before he became dictator, for it was driven by the many problems that the estate had encountered. From Sulla's point of view, the Senate had to be augmented and strengthened so that it could govern the city and the growing empire of Rome. The way in which he addressed this problem is known in outline, but not in detail, and the chronology of his various measures is not established. He is primarily remembered for his attack on Tribunate, which was perhaps assumed a depropor- disproportionate, pr- oh my god, disproportionate importance in later years, in comparison with his other legislation. The problems with the Tribunate were bound up with other main areas of contention. The original brief of the Tribunes in the historical past was to save the plebeian, plebeian, plebeians from oppression by the magistrates, and this function was not altered by Sulla. In the later years of the Republic, the tribunes had become inextricably associated with the great generals of the day. Firstly, in seeking prestigious military commands for certain generals by taking bills directly to the popular assembly, and secondly, in attempting to force through more legislation to allocate lands to the returning veterans when the generals came home. It ought to have been the Senate that chose generals for specific campaigns, and the Senate which ratified the post-war administrative arrangements and saw to the settlement of veterans. But since the track record of this august body had been woefully inadequate, especially with the regard to record of this August bod wait, sorry. The Senate, which ratified the post-war administrative arrangements and saw to the settlement of veterans. But since the track record of this august body had been woefully inadequate, especially with the regard to the second of these considerations. The generals themselves had been led to enter the political arena in order to provide for their men, and they allied themselves with the tribunes in order to achieve their ends. The solution to this particular problem would have been set up a pension scheme for the soldiers, as Augustus managed to do much later. But this was vastly expensive, and the Romans always seemed to expect defense at cheap rates, instead of tackling this issue directly by improving the provision for veterans, thus removing the need for alliances between tribunes and generals. Sulla strangled the tribunate by removing from the tribunate the right to initiate legislation without the approval of the Senate, and by ruling that anyone who became tribune was barred from holding any further office. No ambitious young man or aspiring politician would be able to launch himself into politics by this route. The office would be filled with non-tites, non-tities, non-tities. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that word is. Sulla also preempted any attempt to establish a permanent body of tribunes, which would have enabled the interested generals to recruit suitable men who were not interested in political advancement to make a career out of occupying the tribunate and nothing else. Sulla decreed that there must be 10 years between each tenure and the tribunate, so no one could choose that path as a career to become a mouthpiece of any kind of military man. There is uncertainty about Sulla's legislation against the use of tribunician veto, and whether it was abolished altogether or merely curtailed although the mechanism by which this may have been brought about is not known. As a political tool, the veto was just as useful to the Senate, or at least it was much it was a it was as much an arm of the aristocracy within the Senate as it was to the populace. And if Sulla did in fact abolish this primary tribunician right, his motives will have embraced the desire to curb the use of it by individual senators to achieve their own ends of obstruct the aims of others. In the end, the controversy over the abolition or otherwise of the veto and the general crippling of the tribunate is largely academic. Because whilst the intent of the Sulla legislation was far-reaching and radical, and of obvious importance to Sulla himself, the effects were so short-lived that it hardly matters what the details were. As soon as Sulla was dead, various politicians started to unravel his work, so that there was very little left to do by the time Pompey and Crassus, as consuls in 70, fully restored the tribunate. With regard to the Senate, Sulla worked to strengthen it and to return control of the Roman world to the aristocracy. One of his most important contributions was his restoration of the control of the jury courts to the senators, which had been contentious, which had been a contentious issue ever since the time of Gaius Sempronius Gracchus, who reformed the standing jury court to try cases of extortion, caestio de rapuntutis. The provinces ruled by Rome were too often regarded as a means of increasing. My God, I'm sorry, the wind here is crazy. Storm happening. One second. Whoa! Holy! It's nearly flooding out there. My God. I'm sorry, one second. I just need to check something. My God, it's not gonna stop for another 3 hours. Okay. In Portugal? Yes, I can't say my exact location, but I'm in the Algarve, and over here there's a huge storm cloud. It stopped for there was a while ago, sorry, but sorry for stopping, but a while ago there was a 1 week of just nonstop like this stormy, rainy stuff, and now it's back again because it's going crazy out here. My God. Okay, let's get back to it. Sorry, the wind is making sounds out of the window. That's very unusual. I mean, no, in winter it normally gets just there's like March and December get very rainy. So it's not great. The only unusual part is that it's just this strong. Normally it's rainy a lot, but it's just very strong. Normally it's humid and rainy at this time, but like this, it's like pretty crazy. It's normally not this stormy. But yeah, let's get back to it. Let me see, where am I? Let me just take a sip of my. Uh, let's go start. Let's just start from here. Let's just continue from here. I'm not sure where we. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I love rain though, but so it's cool. I'm reading here and it's raining outside. That's always the best. And it's warm in here, so that's nice. Okay. If it keeps going for the next while, I might put the shutters down for the wind. But yeah, okay, let's get back to it. Yeah. The provinces ruled by Rome were often regarded as means of increasing personal wealth, and the court had been established in 149 with a view to allowing the provincials some redress at Rome for the wrong done to them by grasping governors and their staffs. The jury panels were drawn exclusively from the senators. But since the men who came before this court were also senators, convictions were made only rarely and reluctantly. Gracchus handed over membership of the jury panels to the to equites, but since they were just as interested, if not more so, in making profit from the government of the provinces, their bias led to the conviction of clearly innocent governors who had curbed and extortionate par- prac- practices of tax gatherers and businessmen. Sulla removed the equites from the juries and reinstated senators, but since he had elevated some equites to the Senate, there would be a supply of equestrians with the experience of the courts who would still be eligible to serve on the juries. Sulla's policies were not wholly det- detrimental to the equites. There was always a number of them who were quite content to remain in equestrian circles, pursuing their business interests that would be forbidden to them if they had become senators. But for those who wished to enter the political life of Rome, entry to the Senate was essential. By his elevation of certain equites to the rank of senators, Sulla, to provide more junior administrative personnel, he increased the number of quaestors from around to a, from about 10, the original quota is not established beyond doubt, to 20. This number is not in doubt, since an inscription found in Rome in the 16th century attests to Lex Cornelia de XX Quaestoribus. In the past election to this junior post, the past in the past election to this junior post did not carry with it guaranteed entry to the Senate. Sulla ruled that all the young men elected as quaestors should automatically become senators, thereby prom- promoting the sustained growth of the Senate and converting it eventually to an elected body rather than an appointed body. In line with the increase in the number of quaestors, Sulla also increased the number of praetors to 8 per annum, significantly providing with the two consuls 10 ex-magistrates every year, who could then govern the provinces of Rome. It is suggested that he tried to limit the term of office as provincial governor to 1 year, and the provision of a larger pool of magistrates was made in part to facilitate the rapid turnover of the governors. But this suggested limitation on the duration of office. Wait, But this suggested limitation on the duration of of office is not fully attested or properly elucidated, and would have been impractical in times of war, when the selection of the right candidate and continuity of command were of prime importance. Sorry, 1 second. Um, okay, let's get back to it. Okay. Where was where was I? When this It would have been impractical in the times of war when the selection of the right candidate and continuity of command were of prime importance. Having provided for the continued recruitment of senators, Sulla abolished the censorship. The post of censor was normally instituted every 5 years or thereabouts. To thereof or thereabouts. Senior senior officials with long experience were chosen to take the census of the citizens and allocate them to their classes, which were defined by wealth. One of the major functions of the censors was the revision of the membership of the Senate, which which entailed adl- ad- election of some men into the ranks of the ejection of others who'd proved unsuitable. Sulla had provided for the first time these sensorial these sensorial functions by the election of 20 quaestors every year, but he could but he could not directly provide for the second. Without the censors to exercise some control over the senatorial conduct, Sulla laid down a rigid pattern for the career development, stipulating that there should be several years between the tenure of each office on the long road to the consulship, with the intended result that no one would be able to take up the reins of the estate until at least the age of 42. Few in Rome could be in any doubt that he meant what he said, and that he would brook no opposition to his rule. Sulla's reaction was extreme when he learned that Quintus Lucretius Ofella, some sources prefer to name him Afella, one of his own officers who had done him good service in the civil wars, intended to stand as candidate for consulship without having held any previous offices and without having reached the correct age. At first Sulla asked him nicely to withdraw his candidacy. After a short interval, when it became clear that Ofella would do no such thing, Sulla had him assassinated in the forum. Perhaps when Pompey heard of this he began to ponder about his own future. He was only in his twenties and could not hope to advance in the Sullan political arena for many years. 2 decades at least, if he were to follow the prescribed path to the consulship. He needed special dispensation to rise any further, and it seemed that it would not be forthcoming from Sulla, unless there were special tasks requiring his particular talents. In those cases, he could glide through the legal entanglements and put off any worries about his future until he had completed the tasks in hand. He was assured he was assured of employment at least for the time being, because there were wars to be fought against Marian sympathizers who had fled to Spain, Africa, and Sicily. The governor of Sicily, Perpenna, was a declared Marian. If if it was Sulla's intention to limit provincial governors to 1 year of office and exercise tight control over his generals, then he was forced to take exceptions from the beginning. He sent Pompey to root out opposition in Sicily. Until this moment, Pompey had held no official post. He was too young to have been elected to any magistrate, and though he had commanded armies since he was 23 years old, he had never been legally appointed by the Senate. With Sulla now in control of Rome and intent on ironing out all anomalies of this sort, Pompey's position would be rationalized and legalized. As the treatment of Ofella had shown for everyone else except Pompey, there would be strict rules about the progression through the junior and senior administrate and military posts. In Pompey's case, a legal friction allowed him to take command of the expedition to Sicily. He had not served as praetor, and so could not legally process from that office to propraetorship. With the, but with Sulla at their backs, the senators dutifully bestowed praetorian powers on Pompey. This meant that he would be equal in rank to Par, Parperna. Pompey's military reputation went before him. Perperna did not stay to fight it out in Sicily. He turned up later as an adherent of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the consul of 78, who followed Sulla's example and marched on Rome. When Lepidus was defeated and the cause was lost, Perpenna took the troops who remained loyal and went to join Sertorion in Spain, where he had faced Pompey again. As Pompey took possession of Sicily, Perperion Sarbo, who had only just arrived there from Africa, also turned tail because he was not ready for a battle. He did not return to Africa, however, instead he lurked on the island of Corcyra, modern Pantellaria, achieving very little. First, one of his senior officers was captured while on scouting mission and committed suicide, and then unrecorded uh, and then in an unrecorded encounter, Pompey's squadrons found Zarbo himself. He was brought to Pompey in chains and executed. It would have been far better for him if he had been killed in battle or had committed suicide. But instead his death was a sordid affair. He broke down and wept, and had to ask permission to relieve himself before the swordman could do his work. Pompey earned his reputation as the boy butchered from the fro- Pompey earned his reputation as the boy butcher from this episode. Zarbo had been one of his defenders at his trial of expropriation of goods from the siege of Asculum, and for his past services to the young man he perhaps hoped for mercy. According to Plutarch, Carbo was on the list of proscribed men whom Sulla wanted killed, which would hardly be surprising, but this is seen by some other modern authors merely as an apology for Pompey's behavior in having him summarily executed. Another claim is that Sarbo was still consul when he died, but this is disputed and on the whole seems unlikely. The date of his death is not established, but it is probable that whenever it occurred, his consulship would already have been annulled. There was no other end for Tzadbor except death, even if Pompey had relented and sent him as a prisoner to Sulla, so that his own hands remained free of his blood. It is hardly likely that Sulla would have spared his enemy. He was implacable, and had shown no mercy to the captured Samnites after the desperate battle outside Rome. 6,000 of them were killed in the Circus Maximus, while Sulla calmly addressed the Senate. While while Sulla calmly addressed the Senate, assembled in the temples of Bellona, close enough for the screams of the victims to be clearly heard. It's dark. Pompey's reputation for cruelty was an inevitable consequence of his acceptance of his command against the enemies of Sulla. The young Pompey, who does not compare well with Caesar and his famous Clementia, and Caesar's late propaganda, was eager to demonstrate and exagger, exagger, exaggerate this difference. Oh man, that part I did not understand. Pompey's apologists fall back on counter-arguments, highlighting his merciful actions. Plutarch said he turned a blind eye and let many people escape unarmed from Sicily, especially the lesser-known men. In dealing with one of the unarmed of the chief citizens of Himera, a man called Sthenius, Pompey was specially lenient. He had ordered to punish the city because the inhabitants had supported Marians, but Sthenius argued that the whole population should not suffer on the account of one person who was to blame for the current situation, namely himself. Pompey heard him out, and since he was impressed by his disarming attempt at self-sacrifice, he pardoned the city and Sthenius too, thereby earning long-lasting support from the people, and in particular from Sthenius. Cicero endorses the story and provides evidence that associated with Sthenius sorry, Cicero endorses the story and provides evidence that the association with Sthenius endured. Okay, so should I do? I don't know. Should I do 2 more pages? Okay, I'll do 2 more pages because this is how long each page is, and it will take maybe 20 minutes to finish these 2 pages. Not 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes or something. But yeah, I will do 2 more pages and then we start and then we finish. Sorry. Okay, let's get back. Um, one second. Okay, one second. Okay, let's get back to it. Oh, someone else entered. Welcome. If you would like to give a message in the chat, which is somewhere here, if you feel comfortable with that, of course. Let's get back to it. With Tsarbo eliminated and Sicily, with Tsarbo eliminated, let's go. Yeah, let's go. Let's finish this. There's still a long way to go with this book. It's a long one, but it's interesting. I like it. It's hard, but it's good. With Tsarbo eliminated and Sicily pacified and brought into Sullan fold, it was now decided to send Pompey to Africa to eradicate the Marians who had taken refuge there. Once again, the appointment was legislated by the senatorial decree. Pompey appointed his brother-in-law, Memmius, to command in Sicily, and set sail as soon as he could. In Africa, in Africa, the anti-Sullan Domitius Ahenobarbus had made himself Ahenobarbus, yes, I know him. Oh, Ahenobarbus had made himself governor after the death of the previous incumbent, whose harsh government had ended in riot at Utica, in which he was burned to death. Domitius was not an official appointed representative of the Senate and people of Rome. Like Sertorius in Spain, he had raised an army and had made an alliance with a neighboring tribe, in this case Hierbas, king of the Numidians, of course, Numidians. The Rome world offered considerable opportunity for the renegade refugees, who followed the same pattern in the later civil wars. For instance, after the murder of Caesar, the assassins Brutus and Cassius seized much of the east, taking over provinces and armies in readiness for coming battle against Octavian and Antony. In, the, in demonstrated in demonstrated the e- it demonstrated the ease with which troops could be persuaded or brought, and would readily fight for one man rather than the abstract idea of Rome. A charismatic leader with a cause needed only a promise of rewards to rally an army. The phenomenon that Tacitus called the secret of empire, this called the secret of empire, was already well known in Pompey's day, and it was Sulla who had shown the way. Domitius Ahenobarbus was in strong position, and perhaps seemed stronger to Pompey, who did not underestimate the difficulties of invading Africa. A position might be fierce, so to increase his chances of gaining foothold, he split his forces into two groups, and landed at Utica and Carthage. Probably, to his surprise, there was no one to meet him with hostile intent, only a crowd of deserters coming to join him, 7,000 in all, more than an entire legion. The terrain in Africa could assist defenders and hinder invaders, and Domitius made full use of it. According to Plutarch, Pompey outnumbered him, so desertion of 7,000 men must have tipped the balance. No doubt Domitius felt nervous of committing himself to battle, except in the best of circumstances, in case more soldiers lost faith in his ability to defeat Pompey. For the first few days after the landings, Domitius was granted a short respite, and entrenched himself behind some rough ground until Pompey was prepared. The reason why he was not ready for this period was was not due to the lack of planning on his part, or in fact anything that he could have foreseen. One of his soldiers fortuitously dug up a pile of coins, and so the troops spent all their time and energy in digging lots of holes with an enthusiasm in inverse proportion to their disinclination. If they had been a Lateran duty in an intense search for what they imagined must be the rest of the treasure. All the generals need to be at least amateur psychologists, and in the same circumstances of most of them would probably have dealt with the situation just as Pompey did, by doing precisely nothing. No amount of harsh orders would have made the soldiers move on willingly. Far better to let them exhaust themselves whilst Pompey watched, highly amused. This is hilarious. Within a short time, the men were sufficiently disappointed to stop the hard work and start to the fighting. This is hilarious. Oh my god. I'm gonna read this part again. No, actually, no, I'll go from no amount of harsh orders would have made the soldiers move on willingly. Far better to let them exhaust themselves while Pompey watched highly amused. Within a short time the men were sufficiently disappointed to stop the hard work and start the fighting. The fighting is the hard work. Domitius did not attack while Pompey's men were so preoccupied, but he did use the time to prepare. Sitting behind the shield offered by the difficult ground, he had no intention of moving. Pompey quickly assessed the problems of attacking Domitius, realizing that in order to do so, he would probably have to resign himself to losing a lot of men. The two sides formed up ready for battle, but before either could make a move, a rainstorm blew in, and Domitius gave the order to return to camp. The last thing he expected was to be attacked now, so that so that is what Pompey did. While Domitius's men were totally unprepared, Pompey joined in the battle sensibly, wearing his helmet. But though it protected him, it also made him anonymous to his own men, and when he was challenged, he was too slow in replying. As a result, he was very nearly killed. Thereafter, in order that the same mistake should not happen again, he discarded his helmet. Domitius's men were forced back, and it was clear to everyone that victory was soon to be Pompey's. The army saluted the young general as Imperator, but he refused to accept the title because the war was not over yet. The survivors of Domitius's army had gathered in the camp and must be eradicated. Pompey led charge himself. He knew that how to wring the maximum effect from the soldiers and their probability probable and their probably spontaneous salutation, without incurring too much opprobrium from Sulla, whose patience might not stretch to approval of another military hero in the Roman world. Sulla doesn't want another military hero. No, I am the one. Okay, let me go check. Hard, agree. Yeah, it is. It's pretty hard, but in some parts it's like a bit hard, but then after in other parts I catch myself back on. I hope it's understandable. I don't know if for me when I'm reading I can understand because I'm reading, so yeah, it's easier for me to understand, but I hope everyone here can understand. Good chaps? Oh, chapter? What chapter or this is chapter 2. They're very long chapters. I mean, look at these pages. Is there that what you meant or let me know. Very understandable. Good diction. Thank you. I hope it's understandable. I'm sure it's not, some parts are not very, um, with the full stops, they're not very well made. That's all. So I kind of, sometimes I'm like, this stops over here. So yeah. Okay. So let's get back to it. It was a good chapter. Yes. I mean, it's not finished yet. I mean, we're still in chapter 2. The last chapter was also pretty good, but this it's getting I think each chapter it's going to get more stuff happening because we're getting closer and closer to the civil war between Pompey and Caesar, and the more we get close to there, there'll be so I'm going to explain once I finish with this page, and then after I'll explain how, because I studied the Pompey and Caesar until the Civil War from the beginning, so I kind of have an idea of how it will go. So yeah, I'll explain in a second why I just finished this page. Domitius was killed, but no one knows how he met his death. Some later sources say that he died in battle, but it is more likely that Pompey had him executed, like Carbo. Domitius may or may not have been proscribed, but it was only a technicality. Pompey's apologists underline the fact that he acted as a representative of the Senate and the people of Rome, and primarily of Sulla, and therefore the blame for the deaths of both Carbo and Domitius really rests with Sulla himself. Detractors prefer to portray Pompey as the bloodthirsty tyrant at the age of 24. In both cases, he executed the enemies of Sulla. He could have chosen to send them to Rome and let Sulla deal with them, but from the point of view of the campaigns he had just led, the executions of the chief quarry rounded off the fighting and gave it some purpose. The soldiers might not fight so readily if they saw that the political ringleaders habitually went free, while hundreds of men lay dead. They would probably reason that the negotiating would achieve the same result and avoid all the bloodshed and hard work. Within a startlingly short time, the campaign was over, and pacification could begin. Pompey turned his attention to the kingdom of Numidia. Domitius's ally, King Hyarbas, had fallen foul of Bugud, king of Mauretania, and was in flight, looking for refuge. Pompey lost no time and caught him up, put him to death, and installed the previous ruler, Hiempsal, and all of which implies that Pompey had already made contact with the Numidians and had made his decision as to what to do once Hyarbas was found. Pompey had useful allies in Sicily and Africa. Pompey now had useful allies in Sicily and Africa. Suthanius of Himera, Hiempsal of Numidia were bound to him personally, and the alliances such as these would compensate for the lack of political following in Rome. He had also gained experience of cooperation with native kings on the on the periphery of the empire, of the judgment necessary to choose between rivals, and of power of Rome in making that judgment. Okay, like that made no sense. Yeah. He had his first taste of independent action outside Rome, without reference to the Senate, and the fortunate experience of winning wars and making administrative and diplomatic decisions, which on this occasion did not seem to have been challenged. And that's it for tonight. I'm gonna bend this page a little bit so that I know where I was. This is page 36. Remember that. But it's also bended, so we're like halfway through this chapter now, chapter 2. That's these chapters are way too long. Anyways, as I said before, I'm going to explain now how it's going to be broken, how it's broken down. This book is probably going to be. So now at the beginning you can see that it's getting more and more like closer to climax like that, getting slowly closer. There was the first at the beginning with Sulla gaining into control. That was the first explanation of the Republic and the Senate of how it works. And then there was the fighting and how Pompey got to Sulla. So yes, then there's all of that, and then now and then there was a bit of a political break of just how Sulla was political arranging, and now there is again more battles of them making sure they have control of the empire, Sulla and Pompey. And well, Pompey was given the command of the army by Sulla, which was against what Sulla was trying to make. He's according to Sulla too young, but he still gave the power to him anyways. So yeah, that's a little bit like Sulla. You look like you're just power. Anyways, later on, so now it's going to probably be a little bit more for this chapter, more battling and stuff like that, and then it will be, I think, I'm not fully sure, but a political break. Caesar will get involved a bit. He's captured by pirates. He's having his own story at this moment. He's captured by pirates on an island, and and then after he needs to pay them to get free. But that's a completely different story, anyways. So there's going to be some kind of political break there. Then Sulla dies. I think a stroke or something like that. And then it goes into uh Caesar gets back to Rome, into Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus or someone, a very rich man. They become the consuls of Rome, the main people. They stay there for a few years. Then Caesar takes control of an army, becomes general. Then he goes to Gaul and starts fighting there. And then and Pompey is having his own political affair. He retires. And then when the Senate sees that Caesar is becoming a threat to the Senate, they well a threat to the Senate. And in my belief, Caesar was the good guy in this situation from what I have studied. But of course, I'm always open to other point of views. But anyways, so he then Pompey is put into that. So it's going to go here. It's kind of now at its first climax, kind of this chapter, and then it's going to a little bit soothe down into the political stuff, and then it's going to go back up again with the Civil War, and then it's going to be very like high, dun-dun-dun-dun. But yeah, I can't wait till then. And until then, in the low part, it's just going to be lots of hard words to say. And let's get through this as fast as possible. And let's get through this in this weekend. Hopefully, I'll be back. Hopefully, I'll be back tomorrow if I don't have any plans or something comes up. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the reading. We had a bunch of views today, I think. We had a bunch. I sent this to a bunch of people, so yeah, I th I think we had it good today. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it's not too hard to understand from this because I understand that it's a little bit hard with the language and stuff. And if you're totally new to this, to Roman politics and these names, and if you don't know these people, I would say if you're really interested in this, maybe do some small. You don't have to, but you can do some small like research to find out some names if you would like to. Yeah, so that it's easier for you to understand. But anyways, good night. Yes, thanks. No problem. Good night. Yes, see you next time, maybe tomorrow or day after. I'm also on the other channel. I uploaded some funny stuff. Yeah, I'm funny on that channel. Anyways, um, good night. And Dan Carlin, what was who's Dan Carlin? Sorry, I don't know. Is that Dan Carlin? Let me know. Hardcore history episodes on Rome. Okay, so is that some kind of like history of Rome? Yeah, from what I started with Roman Empire was I started watching from a channel. I really recommend this channel. They're very good. Um um called Kings and Generals. Okay, yeah, I'll Google him, Dan Carling. Let me just copy this. So and then I'll paste it onto Google when I'm done here. Very good, very good podcast. Okay, yeah, I'll check it out. It sounds good. I'll check it out tomorrow because now it's late, but I'll check it out tomorrow. And yeah, I recommend a channel called Kings and Generals. They're very they do lots of effort on that, and I think they from lots of stuff I learned was from them. Of course, I also watch other stuff and other I watch from all kinds of documentaries, and I made my own belief like from I don't like seeing just from one place because even if I don't agree from another place, because then it's kind of closed-minded. So I like to see from all the places. So even places that praise Pompey or something like that, I also checked from that side to see like all the different stuff. Yeah, Kingston General is good. Okay, you know it. So yeah, they're great. It's very they know how to keep your attention. And when I was younger, that was great because during COVID times, I was nonstop obsessing over that. You're gonna love Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna check this. I'm gonna go Google it today, and then I'm gonna see some of his videos tomorrow if they're on YouTube and stuff. But yeah, I need to go now. It's late. I need to go to sleep. And yeah, good night. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great, great, great night. And yeah, see you next time. Bye bye.